got the cornfield calm, Midwest tone, but he's spitting facts like a dog with a bone. Lanky frame, fire-haired, eyes on the case, breaking down the game in the darkest place. Sports scores to murder boards. Who's your logic? Cuts like swords from Friday lights to chalked out lines. This redhead's brain rewrites the lines inside the Who's Your Mind, where the stories twist and stats unwind. He's a legend in flannel, mic in hand, digging deep where few can stand. From touchdowns to crime scenes raw, he's got the truth in every draw. Yeah, step in if you dare to find what's brewing inside the Who's Your Mind. He'll talk Pacers, Colts, or Colts on trial. Who's your humor with a devilish smile? He's that redhead sleuth with a box of clues. Takes your headline, breaks the news. With every stat and every scream, he's painting portraits in your stream. Don't blink, he'll tie it tight. From game night wins to murder flight. Inside the Who's Your Mind, where the facts hit hard and the lines are blind. He's a ginger ninja, smooth and slick, cracking cases play by play quick. From courtrooms to the hardwood floor, he digs for more than just the score. Tune in and don't rewind, get deep now inside the Who's Your Mind.
All right, welcome in everyone to Inside the Who's Your Mind, brought to you by Military Broadcast Radio, helping give veterans a voice. Back for another exciting week of college football and the NFL. So many upsets every time. There's always at least one or two upsets that happen that nobody ever expects, and it's kind of the beauty of college football. But there's been a lot of questions that have been raised as a result since then, as far as, who's to blame in certain spots. There's already callings for, people getting fired. Some teams are honestly failing to meet even expectations that were had for them to start at the beginning of the season. And we're going to cover all of it today. We've got everything from Florida upsetting Texas. Who's to blame as far as Texas goes? Is it Arch? Is it Steve Sarkisian? Is it the O-line? What is it to blame in Austin for Arch's, shortcomings? Then you've got, Florida. They get a big win against Texas, which is great. They're back, Billy Napier is back to a career 500 record. Should they keep him? Should he go? Should he just hire an OC to call the plays? We'll see. Then we have Penn State, falls to UCLA big time after being 25.5-point favorites. Is it time to move on from him? But if it is, who do they hire to replace him? Who do they think is going to be able to bring him in and be that person that's going to be able to make a significant change to make them championship contenders? I personally, right now, I just don't see it. I don't see anybody being able to do that, but we'll get into that here shortly. And then, of course, in the NFL side, we have the Ravens falling to the Texans really, really badly. The Bengals have kind of made a desperation move trading for Joe Flacco. The Dolphins and Cardinals blow pretty major leads to teams that they should have probably both beaten. And then the Bills, Eagles, and Chiefs are all upset. So is this year more level than it has ever been before? So really great show today. Really, really jam-packed. Excited to talk about it, even though I'm talking about it basically to myself. But anybody who wants to engage in the comments or anything like that, send me a message, DM me, whatever you want to do, just let me know. But nonetheless, so let's get into the college football side of it. So Florida upsets Texas in a pretty massive way. Now, the benefit, it was in the swamp. It's hard for anybody to play in the swamp, no matter what. Don't care who you are. Don't care how good you are. It's usually tough to play down there nonetheless. And a lot of people are blaming Arch for the loss down in Texas. And honestly, they're blaming Arch for a lot of his shortcomings so far this season. To break it down, including his rushing touchdowns, he's responsible for 16 total touchdowns and 5 picks. He's got a little over 1,100 yards, and Texas is sitting at 3-2. Now, the biggest thing, he's lost to 2 key Power 4 schools. He lost to the number 1 team in the country in Ohio State, who has a fantastic defense, so can't take that too much away from him. And then he lost to Florida in the swamp against another actually pretty good defense in Florida. I'm not going to sit here and say Florida's defense is the best, but they're pretty solid. And both games that he's lost has been on the road. Every game he's won, albeit has been against inferior competition, he has won, and it's been at Texas. I will say for this, Arch is a sophomore. There is still time for him to grow and for him to figure it out. I think for part of what ended up hurting Arch overall as a whole is last name. And I think this happens a lot of times with players who are relatives of other great players, no matter who or what sport that they played. I always bring up the example of Bronny James for LeBron James. Bronny is coming in with such high expectations, and he's never gotten a chance to really develop himself. He only stayed in college for a season before, declaring for the draft, getting drafted by the Lakers. So he never had a chance to truly develop his game at that next level to then prepare him to be able to go into the NBA and play there. Now, we noticed when Bronny was in the G League, he actually fared pretty well because he's able to learn. He was able to play on, the level that other guys are on that same level with him. He's able to actually compete pretty well. He's done fine. And I know a lot of people like to make the comparison, Shedeur Sanders, because Shedeur, he was very well, very hyped up, ended up falling in the draft pretty badly. And a lot of people have made the comparison. Well, if it was, Shedeur going through this, people would have, crucified him. They'd have run him over with everything. But because it's Arch, he gets a pass. I will say for Shedeur, if you look at his numbers from when he was when he's at Jackson State to when he goes to Colorado, Jackson State, he absolutely dominates with Travis Hunter and Dion and his brother Shiloh. They dominate. I make the comparison. It's like a big fish in a little pond. Super easy for you to do really, really well when you're the big fish in a little pond, because obviously their talent level is way above Jackson State and the rest of that conference. Then they go to Colorado. Now they're in a Power 4 conference. They have to take on what was the end of the Pac-12 for at least one season. And they take a roster that went 1-11 to 4-8, really rough year, but they still did it. Then the next year, he ends up going 9-4. They win a bowl game. They were technically in contention for the Big 12. And again, the program consistently got better as a result of that. With Arch, he's only gotten 1 year to start so far. This is his first year starting. Now, we saw other games from them last year. So small sample size. He did well in the games that he played. He ended up winning most of the games that he played in when he did compete in it. But there's been a lot of people saying, there's a reason why Sark kept Quinn and, lost my microphone for a second there. There's a reason why he didn't allow Arch to just start right off the bat. And for a lot of people who don't remember, Arch did have a redshirt season. So the little bit of sample size we did get initially was not pretty. Arch did not look good. Then he continued to sit, kind of learn behind the system. The few times he came in, he looked better. He got more comfortable with everything. Again, the next season, last year, technically his freshman year, he's sitting there, he's learning. He fills in a couple times. Huge night and day difference from when he first got to Texas as compared to now. Now, though, here's the other thing that people need to remember. They did have film samples on him just from the few games that he played before. So they do have an idea. Texas lost a lot of talent. They lost two big wide receivers in Golden and Isaiah Bond to the draft. They lost a couple offensive lineman pieces, which is big. And then the defense, I'm not going to say the defense hasn't lived up to expectations. They just haven't got a chance to shine because the offense has been so lackluster so far for Texas. So it really is a culmination of a lot of things that I know people are frustrated with. I know Texas fans are frustrated with. I know Arch fans in general are frustrated with. I just think for Arch, he came in so hyped up. People were so excited that a Manning is back in, a football world truly competing, especially at a collegiate level and potentially and in the future an NFL level. I promise I'll get to Penn State here in a little bit. I promise. I'll be easy on your Nittany Lions. Um, but for Arch and for people to have a Manning back, there was a lot of expectations. And I think for him too, he is stuck in between such a contrast of his uncles and how they work. Because realistically, Peyton and Eli, although they're brothers, total opposite when it comes to football players. You look at how Peyton was. Peyton was very cerebral. He was very much he practices cadence constantly. He was all about, reading the defense, knowing the offense, knowing the calls, knowing the checkdowns, knowing the audibles, knowing where guys were supposed to be, knowing what their assignments were going to be for both the offense and the defense. Peyton was going to pick you apart schematically and, mentally. Eli, on the other hand, Eli was a little bit more of your backyard brawler. He's just going to be a little bit of a gunslinger. He's just going to kind of wing it. He's going to rely a little bit more on being an athlete than anything. And I think that's where Arch tends to lean towards, is being more like Eli's play style. Because if you watch a lot of his games, and I know they don't do it as much in college, so that's kind of the other bad part that we don't get to see. And maybe we will as he continues to grow, maybe depending on how the season finishes, as well as how the offseason goes. Maybe we'll see Arch take a different step forward as far as, okay, I need to learn how to read defenses. I need to learn how to pick them apart. Maybe he does kind of learn under Peyton's tutelage doing that. But it just seems like right now, athletically, that's what he kind of relies on more, is the Eli style of, I'm just going to sling it, not exactly make the best decisions at times, but I'm just going to put it there and, 50-50 ball, hope for the best and hope that my guy gets it. And I feel like that's where Arch is, to me, struggling, because again, he's a Manning. He's expected to win. Eli didn't do great in college. He didn't do terrible. I'm not gonna badmouth him or anything like that. But Eli was not exactly the crazy guy that was out here just winning every game left and right. Eli struggled a little bit. Peyton even struggled a little bit. Neither one of them ever won a national title. Neither one of them ever really won a Heisman either. Well, actually, no. Peyton did win a Heisman. Correction. Before anybody goes after me, Peyton did win a Heisman. They just never won a national title. But still, it's a tough spot for Archie to be in, because you have so many expectations. You're the nephew of, 2 Super Bowl winners who have won and been to multiple Super Bowls. One is considered one of the greatest quarterbacks, if not the greatest quarterback of all time. And the other one, beat another guy that's considered the greatest of all time quarterbacks, and Tom Brady, twice in a Super Bowl, the only quarterback to ever do that. So for Arch, I think people need to kind of come down to earth. Remember, he's still young. It's only his sophomore year. Frankie, the Patriots, baby, we back. Drake May did look like he was the spawn of Tom Brady Sunday night. Just some of those that throw on the run and he completes it. I'm like, that. No, I have not seen a Patriots quarterback do that in a long time. So I'm really actually surprised and kind of happy that Drake May proved me wrong, because I did not have high hopes for Drake May. 100% transparency, did not have a lot of high hopes for Drake May. I'm watching him in college and I'm like, this is the guy everybody's touting about. Okay, now I see it. Didn't see it in college. Now I see it in the pros. But nonetheless, for Arch, though, I think people need to realize he's still a sophomore. He still has 2 more years. I think he'll take full advantage of that. I think between Peyton and Eli, they're probably both going to coach him to probably stay for 2 more years. And I'll say this to kind of end this topic. It's better that he struggles now with Texas before he goes into the league. And here's why I say that, because people are probably going to think, well, why does he need to struggle? He needs to ball out. He does need to ball out, but he needs to ball out on a struggling team. And the reason why I say that, think about how many guys, look at Alabama, Ohio State, LSU, Georgia. Look at all these colleges that have produced great quarterbacks over the years for so long, and they're always just stacked with talent constantly. What happens to those quarterbacks when they get drafted, in the first 5 picks? Usually the first 5 picks are teams that are really, really bad. Cleveland, Jacksonville, the Jets, all teams that are dysfunctional and really bad franchises. As it stands right now, the Jets have the number 1 overall pick. I highly doubt Arch comes out in the draft this year. But nonetheless, whoever the quarterback is that potentially is going to go there, he's going to struggle. There's not a lot of bright spots there. And you can say that for any team that has a top 10 pick or even a top 5 pick, honestly. Top 10, not as bad. You can just have a bad year. Top 5, you're really bad. And either you just lost your quarterback for the season and you've got potential pieces, or you're just really bad as a whole. You look at Vegas right now. Vegas does have Ashton Genty. They have Brock Bowers. They have Mayer. They have potential. Defense needs a lot of work. The offensive line needs a lot of work. The offensive line needs a lot of work. And they need a legitimate wide receiver to throw to. They need a true number one wide receiver other than Brock Bowers to throw to, even though Brock Bowers is technically just the tight end. And if you're Arch and you ball out at Texas because you have all these first round talent prospects all the way around you, that's great that you balled out. But then when you go into the NFL, you don't have that talent around you anymore. You're going to struggle. And I think for a lot of the guys, you look at Bryce Young. Bryce Young really didn't have to struggle at Alabama because he was set. You look at Mac Jones. Mac Jones didn't have to struggle because he was set. Now you look at Mac Jones. He does have some pieces around him, and he does have a good offensive coordinator and play caller in Kyle Shanahan, and he had it in Josh McDaniels as well. You're starting to see, okay, now I can figure it out. Now I can make better plays. I think that will be Arch. No matter what happens this season, no matter what kind of happens the rest of his college career, it's better that he struggles now, because when he goes in the NFL, if he has to go to a team that is just an absolute dumpster fire, maybe it's New Orleans, maybe it's the Jets, maybe it's another team, maybe it's the Raiders. I mean, the Raiders are probably looking for a quarterback because Geno's not going to be there forever. He's going to have to know how to struggle and how to make things work in order to be a great quarterback. And again, we don't see that a lot of times out of some of these guys when they go to some of these places. You look at Cam Ward struggling because Tennessee's a dumpster fire. So, and the only place he really ever had to struggle is Washington State. And if you look at Cam, he's making plays, he's trying, just doesn't have really a team around him. So just keep that in mind. It's better he struggles now. That way he is great when it comes time to the pros. Now, on the other side of the Texas-Florida game, you have Florida. Now, a lot of Florida fans have been so divided on what to do with Billy Napier. I know Florida fans that want to keep Billy because he is a great recruiter. They want to keep him. They just tell him, stop calling the offensive plays, hire an offensive coordinator, stop calling plays. Other than that, you're fine. There's other people, just get rid of him, just fire him as a whole. And I can see both sides. I will say he is a great recruiter. They have one of the top recruiting classes, I think one of the top recruiting and one of the top transfer classes over the next couple of years. They're like top 5 in both because of his ability to recruit and obviously his ability to attract players in the transfer portal. And I think for Florida fans, what makes them also so conflicted is you look at last year. They struggled last year, but then they go on like a 6-game win streak to end the year. They beat LSU. They beat Ole Miss. They beat Florida State. They beat Tulane. They beat some fairly decent teams last year, even teams that were ranked. And you look at DJ Lagway, and you're like, oh wow, this kid might be the next guy, especially because last year was his freshman year. People expected him to take the next step forward, and it seems like he's regressed a little bit. And I think for Florida fans, when you see him win against a ranked LSU team last year that had pretty good talent, when you see him win against an Ole Miss team that was really talented, that had the hiccup against Kentucky but ended up beating Georgia, and then they beat Ole Miss, you look at that and you're like, man, this guy can coach pretty well. And then he comes into this season, They lose in an upset to USF, which is surprising. You kind of noticed a little bit of the clock management, mismanagement more than anything on Billy Napier's side. Frustrating for a lot of Florida fans. Then they lose to Miami pretty badly. They lose to LSU pretty badly. But then they rebound and they beat Texas. Completely knocked Texas out of the top 25 even. They beat Texas so badly. And he's 22-22 overall. Here's where I think it's difficult is for some head coaches to admit that they're wrong. And I think it's difficult for some head coaches to be willing to admit what I'm doing isn't working. And I think it's even more difficult when you tell a guy like Billy Napier, you need to give up play calling to somebody else, let somebody else call the plays. because you look at his resume of what he has been able to do when he calls the plays. They're able to beat a top 10 ranked team in Texas, albeit they're not ranked anymore. At the time, they were still, top 10 team. He beat a ranked LSU. He's beat a ranked Ole Miss. He's gotten quality wins out of this team. He can recruit well. Everything he's doing is well. It's just not translating to wins. And I think for him, that would probably be a very hard pill to swallow. It'd be a hard conversation to have of, hey, you're not doing what we need you to do. We need you to give up play calling. But I'm doing everything else correctly. You are, but this is what we need to happen. And I think for him, that would be a difficult pill to swallow. And I don't necessarily know if he would be willing to do it. And to throw another name out there that's in a similar situation as Billy Napier, as far as people potentially calling for him to be fired, even though this guy has a better track record. They've been to 4 national titles and they won 2 of them. You look at Clemson. Clemson, they're 2-3 now, finally. They got a second win against UNC and Bill Belichick, which is great. You got another win, but you got a win against a Bill Belichick team that has done nothing but struggle all season long so far, and struggle especially against other Power 4 quality talent. It's nice, but the same question, the same conversation potentially has to be had with Dabo of, look, you're a great coach. You've brought 2 national titles to Clemson. You've made Clemson a powerhouse. You've made them relevant, for the last 15, 20 years. You have made Clemson outside of the SEC for that long stretch of time. Clemson was really the only team that was consistently beating SEC teams with little to no issue. And again, one of the few powerhouse teams in the ACC that, everybody feared, even though they're in a weak conference. They were able to just run through it with no problem. And I think the same thing for Dabo as I do for Billy Napier. That hard conversation of, you have had success. You've been able to do big things. You've been able to do great things. However, it's time to, potentially make a change. And Billy, I think, has more of a chance to be fired, just because I think more of anything coming up short, depending on how the season ends, even though Florida has an absolute gauntlet of a schedule to finish through. I think Billy has a higher chance of being fired than Dabo does, but I wouldn't be surprised if they don't maybe keep him for one more year. I know a few Florida fans try to make the argument maybe they're able to get Lane Kiffin out of Ole Miss. Here's my question to everybody, and I ask this even on TikTok because, people are always saying, oh, well, Lane Kiffin might come to Florida. Maybe. Florida is an attractive spot. Obviously, great weather, great recruiting. Florida has a lot of money, a lot of great history. It's a very well-respected and renowned program. Lane's pretty well established at Ole Miss. They've got money. He's definitely embraced being there. They've embraced him as a head coach. He's been one of the best head coaches to hit Ole Miss for years now. And he's in a good spot. And Ole Miss's SEC schedule typically favors them more than Florida does. If you look at Florida's typical SEC schedule, they're almost always going to face Georgia. They're probably going to face Alabama at least once or twice. Obviously, I know with the new expansion and the rotation and whatnot, they're not going to be facing some of these teams as frequently. I know the Tennessee rivalry is unfortunately going to, not be as frequent there. Same with LSU. There's another big rivalry that they have that isn't just going to be as frequently anymore. Honestly, we'll probably see a little bit of a halt to the Miami and the Florida State rivalry again, even. But they might, just because they need to face quality opponents. But nonetheless, though, why leave a spot where, I'm not going to say the path is easier, but to an extent, it's more manageable than if you go to Florida and you have to face Georgia in a neutral spot. And Georgia's always tough to play in, and they're always going to be tough to play, on top of facing a regular SEC schedule and on top of having to face a quality Power 5 opponent or Power 4 opponent outside of your conference every year as they move to 9 games. If I'm Lane Kiffin, I wouldn't leave Ole Miss if it was me. I wouldn't. You do have still face, tough opponents. You have Mississippi State. You'll still keep the Egg Bowl. You'll still keep LSU, the Magnolia Bowl. I think they have to face Arkansas, maybe, or Oklahoma, one of the two. You'll still have quality opponents to face, but it's so much easier to go through them than it is to have to go through Georgia and what Florida would have to go through. But that's just me. And then, of course, last topic for the college football part, Penn State falls big time to UCLA in probably one of the biggest surprising upsets that we've seen in quite a while, especially considering Penn State was a 25.5-point favorite over UCLA, and they end up losing 42-37. And here's the other thing that I thought was interesting, because Joel Klatt brought this up on his show, and I watched part of his segment on this, but again, it was also one of those. It was weird. He brought up the point of, what if Drew Aller is the best player on Penn State and didn't cost them that game. And when you look at Drew's numbers from the game against UCLA, he was 19-26. He had 2 touchdowns, 200 passing yards. He was Penn State's leading rusher. He had 11 carries for 78 yards. And then you look on the other side to Nico, who, they start the year, they're 0-4, getting blown out by pretty much everybody. They're losing to, group of 6 schools. Their offense is stagnant. They're not doing anything. Their head coach got fired. 2 coordinators are gone. They have an interim head coach. And Nico comes out, goes 17-24, 166 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, but then has 16 carries for 128 yards and 3 rushing touchdowns to boot. So a 5 touchdown day for Nico. And Joel is talking about Drew Aller being, the best player for Penn State. And here's the thing for me with both Drew and James Franklin both, because they go hand in hand. Drew to me is just another Penn State quarterback that has the talent. He has talent around him to be great. It's never like Penn State quarterbacks truly have to struggle. That's the thing. I've seen a lot of Penn State quarterbacks get drafted, usually not drafted very high, but they're drafted and they never really do well in the NFL. Hardly any of them ever get a starting chance. If they do, it's usually for the Jets. It doesn't end well. And then when I look at James Franklin as a whole and I look at his record, he's 1-10 against top 10 teams in college football. He's, I believe James Franklin is 4-21 against top 10 teams. He's 1-10 against Ohio State. He's 3-7 against Michigan. He's 0-2 against Oregon. And to me, and again, I'm trying to look at this as neutrally as possible. When I look at James Franklin and I see that record, 4-21 against top 10 teams throughout his career, he has 1 win at Vandy, has that, and it was against Georgia back in 2013, 2015, one of the two. And then he has a couple at Penn State. He did beat Ohio State once, back in, I believe, 2016. They technically won the Big Ten title, but didn't go to the playoffs. And I heard a lot of people at the end of the game, especially against Oregon, probably at UCLA, if it wasn't the fact that it was a UCLA home game, a lot of Penn State fans cheering fire James Franklin. I don't disagree. I do think that they should move on from James Franklin just because of he's been tremendously successful. They are constantly a 9-10 win team there at Happy Valley. He's nothing short of great there, but he's not taking them to the next level. And I asked this question even before the season started. I asked this question long before the losses of when is it time to make the move off of James Franklin? But then on the other hand, that I even asked myself and I've asked other people, because when I watch college football right now, there's not a lot of great college football coaches that stay in college. They move on. They move on to the NFL. They just move on to go, they become head coaches, elsewhere as far as coordinators and stuff go. So there's always a rotation. And at least the guys that we have seem to be content where they're at. Ryan Day is probably not going to leave Ohio State unless Ohio State fires him. Same for Dan Lanning. Same for Lane Kiffin. Same for Dabo. I really don't expect them to fire him. Now, there are some other coaches, it's a little bit more flexible, they could potentially be fired. But you notice the names I mentioned, they're all, staple coaches with teams that, with the exception of Ole Miss, pretty competitive for where they're at, and they're almost always competitive as far as who they face and, making a potential run for the playoffs. Same with Kirby Smart. Kirby Smart's probably not going to go anywhere unless Georgia fires him. Just be honest. And for James Franklin, you're almost always good. Up until the 12-team playoff format, you almost always missed the playoffs. You've beat Ohio State once. You can't get over that boogeyman. You've only beat Michigan 3 times out of 10. It's hard for you to get over the Michigan hump. And now you're 0-2 against Oregon, both in the Big Ten Championship and then the 2 weeks ago, even at home at Happy Valley in a whiteout game, you're 0-2 against the Ducks. It's hard to keep a guy because you do great up until you got to at least be competitive and be great. And then you fall short every single time. And it's sad. But again, my biggest rhetorical question, even to my own, who do they hire? Who do they bring in? Who do they think they could get? Because you're probably not going to pull any of the guys that I mentioned before. You're probably not going to pull them away from any of their programs. You're probably not going to pull Kirby away from Georgia. Georgia's going to throw the bag at him to keep him. Probably not going to pull Dabo away from Clemson. They're going to throw the bag at him to keep him. Ryan Day's obviously not going anywhere. Ohio State, definitely not to go to Penn State. You're not pulling Dan Lanning away from Oregon because same thing. The Phil Knight will probably personally buy him whatever he wants in the world. And same with Lane. You're not pulling Lane at Ole Miss to go to Penn State to have to compete against in Oregon, to have to compete against an Ohio State. You're just not going to do it. So I do think it's time to move on from James Franklin. I just don't really know if there's anything that would truly be able to, I don't know if there's anybody that would truly be able to make the difference for him and for Penn State to get them over the hump. I don't even know if a coordinator. I mean, I know they brought Jim Knowles in on the defensive side, but honestly, it seems like defense has regressed a little bit because, I mean, Oregon was able to drop 30 on them. Obviously, UCLA dropped 42. And then the other teams they face, Villanova, Nevada, nothing really too crazy. Like, oh my goodness, look at Penn State's defense. You're not exactly facing the top quality teams as far as that goes. I got Vito, first time viewer. Appreciate you tuning in, Vito. I appreciate that. What are your thoughts on Michigan? That's a team I root for, but I am biased very much so. I don't have anything against Michigan. I do think the future in Michigan is bright. I like Bryce Underwood. I'm an LSU guy, so you guys technically stole our quarterback. But we use that money to fill other holes in the transfer portal. I think Michigan's solid. I do think Michigan is going to kind of have to get back into a little bit of a rebuild mode. They lost out on a really top offensive line for a long time, but they're still there. The quality's still there. I think having Haynes in the backfield helps tremendously for their run game because that's something that they've missed. They had Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards for so long. They were so used to having a big offensive line, running the ball whenever they need to, and a dominant defense. I think the defense is still pretty solid. I think Wink Martindale's finally come back into his groove being the defensive coordinator there. So I think Michigan's going to be pretty decent this year. I haven't looked at their schedule. Their schedule should be pretty favorable. So I think the chance for them to go back into the playoffs is there. Actually, I will look real quick to see Michigan's schedule because I can't remember if Michigan has to face Oregon this year or not. Here's Michigan. And so Michigan does have a pretty favorable schedule. They have to go to USC, they host Washington, they go to Michigan State, Purdue, Northwestern, Maryland, and Ohio State. They might be able to make the playoffs again, like full transparency. They might be able to, make an argument that they could probably be one of the 12 teams that makes it into the playoffs for sure. So I appreciate that video. Appreciate you tuning in. Hope you're liking the conversation. Feel free to shoot me any other questions that you potentially got. I'm more than happy to have some banter back and forth. But let's move on from college to the NFL real quick. A little bit of surprises in the NFL. I think the NFL this year has kind of tapered off a little bit more than what it has before. I know we've seen a lot of tapering off in college because we have NIL, we have talent and recruits able to be spread out a lot more. So you have teams that are able to make bigger impacts now than once they have before. I feel like the NFL, kind of the same thing. It started to temper out. Injuries have definitely started to rear their ugly head throughout the league, and that's part of the Ravens' issue right now. The Ravens fall pretty badly to the Texans without Lamar Jackson, with Cooper Rush as the starter. Just an all-out, really, really ugly game. Texans win 44-10 to win their second game on the season. CJ Stroud looked like CJ Stroud of old. He was 23-27, 244 yards, and 4 touchdown passes to boot. This Ravens team, I feel bad for this Ravens team because part of it's injuries, part of it's a little bit of age, and part of it's a little bit of experience. That defense, they lost a lot of key leaders as far as like Calais Campbell left. And some of these guys, they're starting to get figured out by a lot of the other offensive coordinators and whatnot in the league. You have injuries. You have other guys coming in that are talented, but that doesn't necessarily mean they work well together. You look at, they brought in Jair Alexander. That's great, but how well does he fit with your system? How well does he work with Wiggins? How well does he work with Kyle Hamilton? Again, also big name guys that are all hurt. And it's hard to be able to get that to be cohesive and be able to get that to work. Derrick Henry fumbling constantly, extremely bad. And then as soon as you're able to get Lamar fairly decent weapons, because honestly, D-Hop is doing better than I thought he was ever going to do. The poor dude gets hurt, and now they're back on the struggle bus. And Vito says, speaking of the NFL, biggest surprise team for me is Jacksonville. Can't believe how well they are playing, considering the fact that Brian Thomas Jr. is even off to a slow start, relatively speaking. It is true. And I was going to get to them a little bit later, but we can talk about them now. Jacksonville is a surprise, and I think that has more to do with the head coach and Liam Cohen and his ability to, I think, really calm the storm and really lead the ship, at least just down a straight and narrow path. And that's really no insult to Doug Peterson, but it just seemed like so much of the Urban Meyer team that was there that was dysfunctional, the negative culture that was bred there, and really a bad foundational set for, Trevor Lawrence. Obviously Etienne got hurt that rookie year with Urban Meyer as the head coach, and they didn't have the greatest wide receivers. They overpaid for Christian Kirk, not a whole lot for, Trevor Lawrence to work with. Now you fast forward, Trevor did finally get somewhat of a decent foundation then in Doug Peterson to kind of learn from, really get to grow and learn. Now you have a guy that, all honesty, did wonders for Baker Mayfield as an offensive coordinator, comes in, kind of realizes the same situation. Because if you look at Trevor and you look at Baker, offensive coordinators changing constantly, not the best franchises, very disorganized, very dysfunctional. The Jaguars had a couple instances where, they were, they even made the playoffs at one point and upset the Chargers. So there's potential there, but it just seemed like they always got in their own way. It seemed like injuries really bugged them, and it just seemed like they, again, would just make really dumb decisions. Liam comes in. He's been a part of the Bucs for a while. He's seen what a successful organization can look like. He's found a quarterback that I think, honestly, Trevor was starting to doubt himself, just kind of like Baker Mayfield was. You have a guy come in. Let's see what you got. Now they have weapons. They have Brian Thomas Jr. They have Travis Hunter. ETN is still fairly solid. I think the offensive line might need a little bit of work still, and the defense is still a little suspect. But I mean, for the fact that the Jags stayed toe-to-toe with the Chiefs, albeit the Chiefs are in kind of a down year, but we've seen that happen a lot where they start off a little bit slow, then they end up picking it up ultimately. But for him to, especially on the last play where he falls again, gets back up, and is able to run and dive into the end zone for the game-winning touchdown, that's impressive for Jacksonville. I think the future should be pretty bright there. I think with Liam Cohen there, the biggest question for Jacksonville, the biggest question for both of them is, what will long-term success look like? Because it's great in the moment, because winning short-term fixes everything. What does it look like across long-term? Like you said, Vito, Brian Thomas Jr., a little bit of a slow start. And I think a lot of that's just due to the fact of rookies kind of have this beautiful thing of when they come into the league, nobody really knows what to expect. Even Brian Thomas Jr. being at LSU, they had a ton of film on him in college. Doesn't always translate well to the NFL, because what do you look like in an NFL system? What do you look like against guys that are supposed to be quote, the next step above you. What do you look like compared to them? And he kind of had the advantage of, nobody has a lot of film on me. Nobody's going to really know what to expect. And he took advantage of that and did it beautifully. I think as the season kind of gets comfortable, as he gets a little bit more comfortable, there's still got to be some chemistry that gets developed there. Obviously, a lot of the coverages and a lot of the attention is going to be to Brian Thomas Jr. because I don't think teams are as worried about Travis Hunter yet because, again, they haven't seen him make that big offensive standing and that big offensive outing yet to really establish himself as a top wide receiver. So they're probably going to be, covering BTJ, double covering him in the meantime. So I think the future is still bright for Jacksonville nonetheless, though. I'm excited to see what they look like. I'm just hoping the long-term success stays there, nonetheless, though. And then Bengals make a little bit of a desperation move earlier today. They traded the Browns 2 picks for Joe Flacco to hopefully salvage their season. Jake Browning has been their backup quarterback for a while. He did better last year. He's really struggled this year so far. Now, again, Bengals O-line needs a lot of work. The defense needs a lot of work. The defense already needed a lot of work even when Joe Burrow was the quarterback for the Bengals. But the defense still needs a lot of work, and not having an offense that can move the ball doesn't exactly help that Bengals defense either. So they kind of make a Hail Mary swing. They get Joe Flacco to at least get, decent experience from a guy that started. And honestly, he made miracles work for Cleveland, just a couple of years ago as far as getting him into the playoffs. And he's been in a couple systems with some solid weapons, and he's done okay. I think if Joe goes to Cincinnati, he'll have Jamar Chase. He's got T. Higgins. He's got Mike Gesicki. He's got Noah Fant. Again, I do think Cincinnati needs to invest a little bit more in the offensive line. I do think they need to do something about the run game. I like Chase Brown. I don't necessarily think Chase Brown is truly the guy that's going to get Cincinnati over the hump, but I think Joe could at least put them in a better spot and at least make things more competitive for them as the season goes down the line. I don't necessarily know if he's going to be able to save them. He saved the Browns at one point. I don't know if he'll be able to save Cincy, but we'll see as the season goes on. It was just one of those I saw that, and I'm like, you traded for a 41-year-old quarterback, huh? Like that's the veteran you go after. Interesting. But nonetheless, though, we'll kind of see how it goes. I would almost, now that I think about it, and again, people let me know what you think in the comments because I think it would have been interesting. But the more I think about it, people would probably ridicule me for it. But just to see, what if you call over here to Indianapolis and see what the Colts would offer you for Anthony Richardson? Just see. Just see what it would take to maybe pull AR away from the Colts, because it seems like his time here is done, barring an injury to Daniel Jones, potentially after filling in. I think Anthony Richardson's time is done. So if you're the Bengals, why not see if you can trade a couple picks, see if you can get Anthony Richardson, and just have him as a 1-year rental deal. I mean, Joe Burrow's hurt. Jake Browning's obviously not your guy. How much worse can your season truly get if you go and get a young quarterback that maybe needs a new fresh start? You have Zach Taylor, who's an offensive guy, and you give AR, honestly, kind of the perfect weapon combination. AR likes to throw it deep. He'll hit him right in the numbers if it's a 70-yard pass. Yeah. See if you can make it happen. See if him and Jamar Chase can maybe get a connection. See if him and T. Higgins can get a connection. Again, your season's already starting to go down the toilet. Why not try? Just to see for giggles. Would never ever hurt. Terry, I appreciate you tuning in, ma'am. I am so sorry about your Dolphins falling to the Panthers. I was really surprised. I did not think it was ever going to happen. I was like, oh no, they got this. They're up like 17-0. And I'm like, oh my goodness, they lost. I am really, really shocked. I would love to hear your thoughts, ma'am, on if you would like a new head coach down in Miami or not, because I heard a lot of inklings of that prior to them finally getting the win against the Jets, that there's some Dolphins fans that are a little uneasy and may want Coach Mike McDaniel fired because of such a poor start to the season. Both with Tua, obviously they unfortunately lost Tyreek Hill, but you still got Jalen Waddle. There's still talent there. There's still potential. But I want your thoughts, man, because I know you are a diehard Dolphins fan and love to hear your thoughts on if you want to keep Mike McDaniel or not. Speaking of the Dolphins and the Cardinals, both ended up blowing a lead that ended up ultimately costing them games. Now I don't know what happened with the Dolphins because the Dolphins pretty much had everybody. Tua was still in the game as far as I knew. Now the Cardinals losing, that's the most surprising. But in their defense, they did end up ultimately losing Kyler Murray for part of that game as far as concussion protocol goes, which is kind of disappointing and more surprising than anything. Connor, appreciate you tuning in. I appreciate you. Do you think Tyreek Hill plays again? And if so, is it for the Dolphins? I don't think he does. I believe it was last year, maybe even year before, he had already kind of mentioned the idea by the time he hits a certain age, he wants to retire and maybe become a streamer. And if I'm him, why not type of thing. You look at his leg injury. I think he tore almost every single tendon that was in that knee. And for people that watched the game and watched that injury, or if you saw the replay of it, that injury was bad. And again, he seemed ecstatic when he was hurt and getting carted away. Now, I don't know if that's just because he's frustrated with the team. I don't know if he's frustrated with Mike McDaniel. I don't know if he's frustrated with Tua. If he does play again, I don't think it'll be with Miami. I think he'll either request a trade. I think he'll either be request for his release. He could just retire just straight out and potentially go into streaming, which is something he did mention that he would like to potentially do in the future anyways. If I'm him, the way I look at it, you're still young. You've had a successful career. You've won a Super Bowl. You could maybe make an argument for the Hall of Fame. I don't really know with him. And exactly, he relies on a lot of speed and twitch. I can't even say he's not a bad route runner, but I've never heard anybody say or compliment that he runs routes really well. If I don't know if you remember before Amari Cooper retired, that everybody would rave about Amari Cooper having some of the best route running. Same with CeeDee Lamb, same with Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, a lot of those guys. But a lot of those guys, with the exception of Jamar, they're bigger guys. They have the big frame, they can go up and get it. Tyreek, like you said, kind of a smaller guy, relies more on speed and shiftiness, being able to move and wiggle in and out more than anything. And especially with that leg injury, he might end up losing a step. Now, maybe he tries to go somewhere for kind of a one last gasp, one trick pony thing. It's going to sound cheesy and corny when I say this. I feel like it's just kind of a shot in the dark. If he does, I feel like he would come back for maybe one last Chiefs run, just because that would probably give him the best chance of maybe winning another ring and going out maybe in a higher version of the sunset than anything. But if he does play again, I don't see him playing for the Dolphins again, just personally. And then kind of the last topic of this, we have the Bills, Eagles, and Chiefs all upset by teams. Obviously, I talked a little bit earlier about the Jags upsetting the Chiefs in pretty surprising moment. The Bills got upset by the Patriots and Drake May. And Drake May seems to be the next coming of Tom Brady, at least for that game. Seemed to be the next coming of Tom Brady in that. And then the Eagles fall to the Broncos, which again was also kind of weird because they were up 17-3 at one point. And Sean Payton, Bo Nix were able to make it all the way back to end up ultimately winning it, which kind of kudos to the Broncos for that. And a lot of people were not a fan of them picking Bo Nix because he's older. He did kind of have the advantage of, being with Oregon. He was, ton of talent at Oregon as a whole. And you go to Denver, and I know a lot of people kind of discredited Denver because of the whole Russell Wilson situation. They're like, it's a mess. They're having to pay Russ all this money still. And they did it in kind of the best way possible. Yes, they're still paying Russ a ton of money, but now they have a rookie quarterback who essentially doesn't count much against their cap at all. And that's kind of your best workaround for having to pay an old quarterback. Realistically, they made a mistake paying him that much money, but it just is what it is. They can only do so much with that, and do so much about that. So I think for Denver, the future is also extremely bright, especially considering the fact you went into Lincoln Financial Field and was able to get the win against Philly. And I think for Philly, there are a lot of questions that are kind of left unanswered. And the reason I say that is because, and For anybody who watches the show, I am a pretty massive Philly hater. At least right now, you can kind of see a lot of those free agency moves, the retirements and whatnot. It's definitely affected Philly as a whole. They still have a good defense. They still have a lot of great defensive players. Vic Fangio is still the defensive coordinator there. There's still a lot of questions because Philly's not winning in a dominant way that we're used to seeing Philly win. They start out really dominant. We saw them go up big against Tampa Bay. Obviously, they went up big against Philly. They were close against Dallas. And they faced somebody else in between there. I can't remember who. Of course, they faced the Giants Thursday night, so that'll probably be an easy win. But we see them get these big leads and ahead, and it's like they left their foot off the gas pedal. And at least from what I remember seeing for the last couple of years of Philly didn't do that. That is not something that Philly typically does. Philly does not usually let up off the gas pedal once they get ahead on somebody, and it seems like Philly has been doing that a lot more here of lately. Obviously, Saquon has not been able to run the ball as well as he did. I will give credit to Saquon. It kind of sucks that he didn't want to break the record. They didn't let him break the record on top of it because he's trying to be a good veteran, trying to be a good leader, letting the younger guys get their snaps, get their carries, get their experience, which is great. However, there is a good point. He may not ever reach that potential or reach that point again of being able to potentially break that record, which kind of sucks. And then, of course, you still always have the AJ Brown drama of wanting more targets. And realistically, the bad part when they faced the Rams, as soon as they started throwing AJ Brown the ball, it was a totally different ball game. Philly was able to actually make the comeback, which is kind of the reverse because that was the first time we've seen them be down and then have to make the comeback all the way back to ultimately end up winning the game. And especially that defense being able to get 2 blocked field goals, one of them returned for a touchdown. So for Philly, I still have a lot of questions though. What is this team going to look like down the road? Now they have their first loss. How does the team rebound? Because we've seen Philly teams in the past kind of be this way. The last time we saw them go on a really big win streak like what they had, they got that first loss. I think they lost like 5 out of their last 6 games or like 6 out of their last 7 games that they had. It was bad. And then they ultimately end up getting bounced out of the playoffs. I don't necessarily think that may happen again. I do maybe think that there might be some more struggles down the road. I think the benefit for Philly is Philly's schedule is actually pretty easy. They face the Giants twice in the next 3 weeks. They have Minnesota in between there. That might be a little bit of a trick game, but they do have the advantage. They have to face their old quarterback in Carson Wentz. Then they go to Green Bay, which will be tough. They host Detroit. Now, at least the benefit, they host Detroit in that one. Then they have to go to Dallas, which Dallas gave them a big run for their money. At least the first time that they saw them, they ended up winning 24-20. Then they host the Bears. That should be easy. Now they go to the Chargers. Chargers have been tough in their own right, especially with that run game. Then they host the Raiders. Should be easy. Then Commanders twice with the Bills in between there to end the season. And the Commanders gave them the biggest run for their money last year, as far as they were 1-1 in the regular season. Then they ultimately ended up getting the big win against them in the NFC Championship. So this Philly has a chance to end the year pretty well. I mean, they still have some good quality wins that could be in there in the meantime, but they do have a bit of a tough schedule ahead of them. And it'll be interesting to see how they go because they've been winning, but they haven't been winning in the usual dominant Philly way that we've been used to seeing, at least over the last couple of years. And it may just be a Super Bowl hangover. It's probably because of the fact they lost a lot of talent to free agency and retirement and whatnot. So that happens. It just is what it is. I do still think that they're a team that is going to be hard to face. I do think that they're still going to go back to the playoffs again, unfortunately. But nonetheless, though, it'll be interesting to see how Philly ultimately ends up doing and ultimately ends up finishing the season. But appreciate everybody tuning in. I really do. Big shout out to Vito and Connor, both of you new over on YouTube. Appreciate it. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you do, please let me know. Like, share, subscribe, whatever you want to do. Completely up to you. I appreciate all the engagement that I get. Really do. I just love talking sports more than anything. It's a blast. Appreciate Terry, Frankie, and MJ all tuning in. Appreciate everybody tuning in to my show as well as MBR. Military Broadcast Radio is great. They help give veterans a voice. For a lot of veterans, they have a lot of cool stories to tell. And if you ever want a cool story or somebody just cool to talk to, definitely reach out to a veteran. We have so many fun, goofy stories, but also solid life advice too at the same time. It's absolutely great to see all these people and get to work with them because they're awesome. They have great shows of their own. They get to meet and interview other great people that are veterans, business owners, etc. So absolutely love it. Please, if you do, there's a little QR code right above me that you can scan to learn more about MBR. All the socials are right next to it. And then if you like anything of mine, want to learn more about me or connect with me, pretty much everything is at Inside the Hoosier Mind. Appreciate everybody tuning in, and I will be back next week. Everybody hopefully have a great weekend and enjoy fall coming in. I forgot to mention that. Fall is here, one of my favorite seasons. Absolutely love it. But
ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to Military Broadcast Radio. As we wrap up today's show, we want to remind you that the podcast of today's episode will be available right after we go off the air. So if you missed any part of the show or want to listen again, be sure to check it out. And remember, we're here to support and honor our veterans. Your stories and experiences matter, and we are committed to giving you a platform to share them. That's right. We're here to give our veterans a voice. So don't forget to catch the podcast and stay connected with us. Giving our veterans a voice.